Okay. What is up, you guys? Who's online with me today? Thank you for joining me again. So, as you saw in the title, CBC baits Trump press secretary to bring back the 51st state rhetoric. I'm sure if you've been listening to the news, you would have seen that the Trump is back to talking about Canada in the context of the 51st state. But you might be wondering, where does CBC come into this? I'll show you a video very quickly soon, and you'll see why I'm linking CBC into this equation. Why would the CBC get involved in this? Well, let me show you something real quick, okay? So just give me a sec just to pull this video up for you. I will share a video with you right now that shows you. So the CBC shared this video today, and it was titled, this got me interested because it was titled, "Trump hasn't changed his stance on 51st state, says the White House." This was on Power and Politics on the CBC. So naturally, when you see that we're going through an election right now, and it's been quiet from the White House. So in my mind, I was like, okay, maybe we can finally start to talk about issues that actually like the more domestic issues that are more internal within Canada. If we're strong within Canada, we can deal with Trump, right? Now, watch what the CBC goes and does here, and tell me if this comes across as strange to you in the same way that it did to me.
Because we're going to talk about a moment during the White House briefings today that we think is probably going to bring Trump's annexation threats back to the top of Canadians' minds. Yesterday, the CBC's Katie Simpson, you know her, she said on the show that she was seeking more clarity from the U.S. administration on potential changes to its auto tariffs. And today, she put her question right to the White House press secretary, plus an additional question about Trump's rhetoric on Canada. And as she does almost every day these days, Katie Simpson joins us now from Washington with some answers. All right, Katie, you were able to ask the press secretary a question. I want to show this. That's Katie Simpson right there. Just so we can zoom in on this. That's Katie right there in the White House briefing room asking the question. You were able to ask the press secretary two today. What did you learn from all of this?
Yeah, I can't see the photo that you put up there, but those press briefing rooms are pretty packed. And so it's pretty competitive to try to get a question. And so, because everyone, just imagine it, it's a room full of reporters that are, reporting back to, dozens and dozens of journalists, news agencies all around the world. And today I happened to get a couple of questions in. The first question I wanted to ask about was tariffs, because of course, the Canadian economy relies so heavily on trade with the United States. And so I asked about that first. And then sort of a question that has sort of been nagging at Canadians. Some Canadians think, why would I ask a question about annexation when Donald Trump hasn't talked about it? But that's exactly what I wanted to know, was why hasn't he talked about it? Has something changed? Anyway, have a listen. Tariffs first, Canada second. Annexation second. Have a listen.
Yesterday in the Oval Office, President Trump suggested that there could be some help for automakers. I'm wondering what that looks like. Is it tariff relief on the 25% tariffs that are in place right now, or the new tariffs that are coming up in May on auto parts? And a second on Canada, if I may. President Trump's tone when it comes to Canada-U.S. relations, Canadians have noticed it's shifted a bit in the past few weeks. Ever since the election campaign started, he stopped talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, at least publicly. I'm wondering if that's on purpose and why.
I would reject the president's position on Canada has shifted. Perhaps he just hasn't been asked about Canada by questions from this group in the Oval Office, but they see him almost every day. But the president still maintains his position on Canada. The United States has been subsidizing Canada's national defense, and he believes that Canadians would benefit greatly from becoming the 51st state of the United States of America. As for autos and auto parts, I don't have anything to read out for you there, but I think the point the president was making is flexibility, and he has flexibility when it comes to negotiations and talks. But ultimately, his goal in his fair trade deals that he is pursuing with many countries around the world is to put the American worker first. And we had automakers and auto workers here at the White House on Liberation Day who believe in this president and his negotiating ability to put them first and to bring those jobs back to the United States of America. And the president's been very clear about that in his conversations with the automakers as well.
So Trump had said in the Oval Office on Monday that he was looking at getting some help to.
Okay, let's stop there for now because. And let me put down this video so you can I want you guys to see the outrage on my face right now. Why the fuck would the CBC go and poke the bear? And you're exactly right, Braveheart. You said, why do you want to know that? Why poke the bear? Like, Braveheart says, these reporters are shameful. What was the point? So she said, oh, this is a question that was nagging the minds of Canadians. No! You guys in the chat, let me know, was this a question you wanted to know the answer to? I know I didn't. I know I was more interested in talking about our problems. How are we going to develop our resources? How are we going to diversify our trade? That's what I wanted to know. I'll give you guys a crass example here. I'll give you a crass example. Say you have a friend, right? He walks into your house, he sees your wife, and he's like, ooh, the things I could do with that girl, you know? Now you got two options here. You can get up and punch that motherfucker in the face, as you should. I'm not encouraging violence online. Anyways, you can get up and punch that motherfucker in the face, or if the person happens to be maybe someone you don't feel confident in taking on, you certainly don't encourage that. You certainly don't go. And I'm hoping here that maybe you and your wife are having the best of relationship. You guys are having all the wild sex that you can, and you're having a good time in general. But if you're in the right position, oh no, I shouldn't have said position after I mentioned. Oh my god, this is how this is what happens when I go live. I just start saying shit. But you certainly don't go back and, like, if the guy decides that he, you know, now has a half a brain and decides to knock it off in terms of disrespecting you, you certainly don't go back and go, yo, why did you stop? Why did you, like, who thought that was a good idea? Like, that's what I wanted to know. Like, we're trying to get through an election where Trump is possibly going to be the deciding factor in probably who wins, and the CBC decides to go back and ask him a question when he's been quiet really about Canada for all of 4 weeks. Why? Now, I have a conspiracy theory here. But I'll read your comments first. BB, and you guys that are just joining, you can get in the comments and let me know. What do you think? What's your theory? Why did the CBC decide that, okay, Trump hasn't been talking about Canada for a while as the 51st state? Let's go and ask his press secretary about why he's not, maybe he's changed his mind, you know? Why isn't he calling us the 51st state anymore? I want to hear your theories here, because it makes no sense that they wanted an answer to that during the election. BB says, stop blaming the CBC for the problems of the CPC. So he's trying to say that Trump wouldn't be a problem if the Conservative Party had a solution to the Trump problem. Well, see, here's the thing, right? I'm not going to say that the Liberals they've obviously used this to their advantage. And you don't hate the player, you hate the game, right? They have spotted an opportunity with the Trump question that it looks like the Conservatives are not able to answer right now, and they're basically exploiting it. But I said I was going to tell you guys my conspiracy theory. But before I do that, R says that's hilarious. It's like they are asking Trump to ridicule Canada more. I smell something brewing. They can't be that dumb. So here's my conspiracy theory, having watched this. So if you have been watching the polls like I have, if you've been watching the polls, you'll have noticed recently in the last week or two that the lead that the Liberals seem to have in the polls has been shrinking. Like even in nanos, the poll that a lot of Conservatives seem to hate so much, the Liberals don't have as big a lead as they did 3 weeks ago. Right now, nanos is showing that lead is down to 4 points or so. Right. The projections on 338 Canada are showing that the Liberals are not leading by as much. And that's because, and this is where the conspiracy in my story is coming from, right? That's because we've stopped talking about Trump. And we know in the discussion where it's about who is best placed to handle Trump, Carney seems to come out top in that argument because we believe, or a lot of people believe, in his ability to negotiate with Trump. Now, when we remove Trump from the equation and we talk about the failure that the liberals have been in the last 9 years, and we talk about affordability and we talk about inflation, and well, I guess inflation is down now, but we talk about affordability, we talk about housing, we talk about drugs and addictions and those kinds of things, the conservatives tend to come out top in that argument, right? So my theory is that we see here that the liberals are losing ground, and surprise, surprise, they find a way to move the narrative back to the particular topic where they win. So my theory is that somewhere in the Liberal Party, someone has leaked this to the CBC, and I'll tell you why. Right? Obviously, I just told you they win this argument, right? But also the timing of this, 4 days to the election day, is ridiculously suspicious. I don't know. You guys tell me. What do you think? What do you think? Because I'm going to show you another video very soon, and you'll see where all of this starts to kind of link up together. Braveheart says, I think they just want Trump to be back in the Canadian mind because they feel that he has died down. Yes, they do want. It would seem like they want Trump to be in the discussion again because it favors the liberals. That's my opinion of that. Okay. R says, is Carney really the best person to handle Trump? Because what this shows is that he just gaslighted us. Okay, I'll show. That's where there's a video coming very soon that you guys are going to see that particular aspect of the argument I'm making here. Carmen Doucette says, I don't think that theory is correct, as Radio Canada was the one that reported that. Oh my goodness. I don't think that theory is correct, as Radio Canada was the one that reported that Trump did do 51st state rhetoric on their call last month. Well, Radio Canada is the CBC, last I checked, right? I'm not sure what you're getting at there. So R says the CBC reporter asked the question, not Radio Canada. There's another separate part of this. There's another separate part of this conspiracy theory. Exhibit 2, and I'll show you that right now. So the CBC proceeds to they did another feature today or maybe a day ago. Where was this? Okay, today. And this one was talking about how Trump apparently did mention the 51st state during his call with Carney last month. And as you know, Carney never mentioned that when he reported back to Canada. In fact, Carney and Trump each said, oh, it was a great call. We're going to talk about this after. It never came out at any point that Trump actually called Canada the 51st state during that call. So here's what the CBC did. They did a feature today and exposing that Trump did mention the 51st state during that call with Carney. And you're right there, Carmen. The source is Radio Canada. So listen to this real quick.
claims that Canada is not viable without U.S. trade. CBC's Janice McGregor leads off our coverage from our parliamentary bureau in Ottawa. So, Janice, walk us through all of these developments.
Yeah, and there's so many grains of salt here that we have to sort of apply liberally, including to what Donald Trump himself said, because he was suggesting that there had been multiple conversations between he and Mark Carney. In fact, we know it was just that initial one, which people might remember happened at the end of that first week of the campaign. All had been relatively quiet on the White House front. That may have lulled some people into thinking that this campaign was going to end talking about different issues than it had started. But of course, things do seem to be looking at another disruption here. Mark Carney's closing arguments to voters this week were already trying to refocus, remind people on.
That's not really the video I wanted to show you guys. But I'll find that video. But my point is that this 51st state rhetoric came back because we discovered that Donald Trump actually did mention that he wanted Canada to become the 51st state on that call. And McCartney did not mention it. In fact, I'll show you what McCartney actually said when he was asked about a month ago, when he was asked about how that particular phone call with Donald Trump went. Listen to this real quick. Let me see if I can find the exact spot here for you. Yeah, here. This is the exact spot in that particular interview.
Trump.
You've said that you wouldn't sit down with Mr. Trump and talk to him unless he respects Canada's sovereignty. Did you convey that to the president today? And if so, what did he say?
The president respected Canada's sovereignty today, both in his private and public comments. Monsieur le Président a respecté la souveraineté de notre pays dans la conversation privée et dans ses commentaires publics. Et on va... Well, ça suffit, monsieur. I mean, yeah. Je suis tenté d'ajouter des mots.
So, of course, we can't get inside his head to know what he was tempted to tell us.
So you would have noticed there that McCartney, what he did say in French there was essentially that he didn't want to add more, but there was a bit of a pause there where it seemed like he wanted to say more, but he did not. And now we learned that that Trump did mention the 51st state during that call, right? According to sources to Radio Canada. Now, I am saying that. Well, let me ask you this: who do you think those sources are? Who do you think those sources are? Who do you think these the members of the press have contact with? Right? It's a weird theory to float, but it makes no sense, and you'll see why it makes no sense, because the reporters do ask McCartney, or they did ask McCartney today about why he did not mention that Donald Trump mentioned the 51st state during their call last month. Listen to this real quick. I'll share that with you just now. So this was obviously McCartney was campaigning in Coquitlam today, and then afterwards they asked him about that particular, why it would never came to light that Trump did mention the 51st state. And here's what McCartney had to say. Listen to this. He says,
Sir, we'll start with the media delegation for 15 minutes. Laurence?
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Carney.
Laurence Martin de Radio Canada. Mr. Carney, why did you say that Mr. Trump respect Canada's sovereignty during the call when he did talk about the 51st state? Let's be clear. I am always clear with everyone, in public, in private, including the president, when that question is raised. That will never happen. Never. And the president and myself agreed that Canada and the United States should begin negotiations in terms of our economic relations and security relations as sovereign nations after the election. And the comments made by the president yesterday emphasize the importance of the choice to be made by Canadians in this election. Who can and who will stand up to President Trump? Yes, but what did you answer Mr. Trump during your call when he talked about the 51st state? What did you say? I say to everyone, including to the president, I said it will never happen.
Prochaine question.
And the press really does get on him. And you'll see, you hear what the next question says here.
To be clear, as I've said to anyone who's raised this issue in private or in public, including the president, that it will never happen. And the president and I, when we spoke, we agreed that Canada and the United States, as sovereign nations, would begin negotiations on our economic and security relationship following the federal election. And I think the president's comments yesterday and before that just underscore how important the choice that Canadians have on Monday. Who can stand up to President Trump? Who can build Canada strong? Who has the experience in order to do that?
Oh, I was
That's
saying
the crucial choice that Canadians need to make.
I was saying the press didn't get on him. Just wait. You see how many questions they asked him about this just now.
On March 28th, didn't President Trump bring up the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state during that call with you?
As I just said, the president brings this up all the time. He brought it up yesterday. He's brought it up before. There's a difference between the conversation that was held between leaders of government, which was this conversation, and a discussion that led directly to an agreement that as sovereign countries, we would have negotiations about our partnership following the election on Monday. That's what the president and I agreed. That's what both of us reported back. And that's what I'm ready to do. And what's at stake in this election is how well we come together as a country for those difficult discussions with the Americans. And to be clear, I have said well before that call, and virtually every time that I've spoken since that call, that President Trump, the Americans, want to break us so they can own us. Those aren't just words. That's what's at risk. That's why we have to build Canada strong. That's why we have to go hard. That's why we have to negotiate properly. That's not why we have to build outside options. That's why we have the plan that we do.
If every time you see an ad, you just want to...
All right. You trust YouTube to hit me with an ad at the wrong moment. But you can the press then proceeds to ask him several times why, like, you didn't mention it then. Why not? And now it's coming to light somehow that he did call Canada the 51st state a month ago. So what was the truth of that conversation? Well, what did we just believe erroneously that somehow we're making some progress with President Trump? Looking at this as Carney, as the guy who is the best placed to negotiate with President Trump, this time it creates this question, because now you have to ask the question: is he truly capable of negotiating with President Trump? Because that's the premise under which a lot of people are voting for Carney, right? But clearly there have been some selective pieces of information given out here. And you guys know, it might sound like I'm criticizing Carney a lot today, but you guys know I pretty fair on the channel. So I want some justification for why this information wasn't out there when the call initially took place. Right? This is not supposed to be a crucify Carney session. If you guys that are liberals have any backup for why McCartney wouldn't put this information publicly and say this at the time of the call, you guys let me know. But I'm gonna go on with the comments right now. While people, you guys come up with some explanations. I put my theory out there, and my theory is essentially at the time of the initial call, it didn't suit McCartney for this information to be public. Because if we had known that, nothing changed really, apart from maybe a stay of execution, maybe people wouldn't have taken to McCartney in the same way, right? And now my theory, again, albeit controversial, and someone has already told me they don't agree, is this. This is coming out now because McCartney is dropping a little bit in the polls. Now, he's still according to the polls, he's still in a comfortable position. He probably will win a majority, but he is losing momentum in the polls. If they had maybe 2 more weeks, there is a chance that Poilievre might overtake him. Now, we have 4 days to go. It's a matter of trying to manage risk. So, obviously, if you guys are just joining, if those of you that might have just been joining, I showed you a video in the beginning of the show showing a CBC reporter in the White House a week ago going and asking the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, why President Trump has not referred to Canada as the 51st state for a while. Now, as I said in the beginning of the show, for those of you who are just joining, I do not understand why they felt the need to ask that question. Because I don't understand it. Like, that was not a question we needed an answer to. It was a stupid thing for President Trump to be saying in the first place. And then you proceed to go and validate that stupidity by being like, yo, you haven't asked us, you haven't called us the 51st state in a while. Why haven't you done that? We're so curious about why you haven't done that. Have you changed your mind? That was a stupid question. I obviously you guys that watch the show know how I feel about the CBC. I actually like the CBC. I actually like the CBC. I've been open in my defense of the CBC. I've said several times I don't want the CBC to be defunded. I do want them to improve, but I criticize them from a position of someone who appreciates what the CBC does. But when they do shit like this, you start to be like, oh, what's the point? Anyways, let me catch up with your comments. R says the press didn't get on him. Okay, I've read that before. Kevin Boyle says, my dad always told me someone that will lie to you will steal from you. Oh, I saw what you did there, Kevin. It's a little sneaky. You're saying allegedly he'll lie, and then you're saying there is some interest there that he might want to serve, eh? Kevin Boyle says, LOL, the states are not interested in breaking us. Garbage. Of course they are, Kevin. Of course they are. They've said several times they want us to be the 51st state. And you know that there's several people, even here in Canada, that would not mind being the 51st state. Now, I don't want to be the 51st state. I don't like what the US is right now. I don't want to be the 51st state. Asande says, Carney's a liar. Well, it's looking like that increasingly with almost every time we catch him saying one thing and 2 things, stuff from 2 sides of his mouth like this, that becomes more and more apparent, right? Now, R says he is not capable. He is capable of deceit. So you're saying McCartney is not capable. He's capable of lying, it seems. He's capable of the weave. That's very similar to Trump. I want somebody in the chat to give me a defense of McCartney. Why did this make sense? Why did this come out now? I want somebody to defend McCartney. I don't want this to be an echo chamber. As you know, on this channel, we try and keep it balanced. And R concludes and says, I guess he's more like Trump than PP. Come on now. What do you mean by that? Asande says, Carney will sell Canada down the river. Okay, I'm going to Okay, so this is a fundamental question here, and Braveheart asked this question that has been on my mind. When Danielle Smith did this, you guys might remember she did this whole podcast with like Breitbart, which is a right-leaning podcast in the US, and she said why she was trying to lobby the people around Trump to postpone their tariffs on Canada, and she says, and I quote, so that we can get through an election. And at the time, we all jumped on her. We said, this is election tampering. This is, you shouldn't tamper with the normal course of events. This is she's this and that. She's a traitor and all that. Well, guys, this is no different to what Danielle Smith did, right? This is no different. It's the reverse situation. The tariff. Sure, we had the tariffs on, but knowing that how this was going to influence or possibly influence the election, why did the CBC go and ask this question? Right. So you're right, Braveheart. This, in my mind, does amount to election tampering because I don't see the reason for it. And if somebody has an opinion that's contrary to that, let me know. Kevin Boyle says no one knows how the immigration vote will go. Most immigrants have family values. They believe in family. Their culture is very different from ours. Okay, maybe you want to clarify that. I'm not really sure what you mean. Okay, so you said no one knows how the immigration vote will go. Most immigrants have family values. They believe in family. Their culture is very different from ours. So I don't know how you're gonna have to help me with that one. You're gonna have to help me with that one. I'm not really sure what you mean. Kevin Boyle says, imagine they are discussed as a culture. So this is just a straight up follow up message after the last one. He says, imagine they are discussed as a culture to see all the homelessness that we have and the drugs on the streets. It must be appalling for them. Okay, so if I take your whole statement together, you're saying that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, you're saying you don't know how well, you know what? I'm not going to interpret that. I'm going to let you help me clarify there because it's kind of hard to follow your train of thought there, and I don't want to butcher your thought. So I'm going to let you explain that to me. Braveheart says this is a clear case of that. They were basically begging Trump to interfere. That's exactly what I said. They should be, you said refunded, but I think you mean defunded. That way they will be neutral. Yes. But, I've said this about the CBC, though. We can call the CBC out because they have standards of journalism. Like, we can call them out and they have to issue a correction to whatever story they publish. Now, the alt media doesn't have the same standard of behavior. Like if a person can publish absolute nonsense, like the way I'm giving you my opinion now, if it turns out that I'm wrong, there's really no journalistic standard. I obviously try and uphold and try and say the truth when I can. And if someone calls me out and I do know I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But really with alt media, there's not the journalistic standard is not quite the same. Right, there's no burden of truth on them per se. And that's why you see there's a lot of shit in the alt media right now. Like people say anything in order to just justify whatever angle that they're working. Right. Kevin Boyle says, I guarantee you most immigrants don't answer telephone polls. Well, I don't think immigrants get to vote though, do they? Like you have to be a Canadian citizen to vote. So I'm not really sure what you mean. You got to be a Canadian citizen to vote. Last I checked, right? So, anyways, yeah, you'll clarify. Carmen Doucette said it's easy to imagine that Trump rambled his favorite word salad, and Carney used his judgment. Okay, that is she's the one person here. She's the one. Okay, I think as I go lower, Isa has joined the conversation. That's he's a big fan of the channel. So welcome to the show tonight, Isa. Carmen says it's easy to imagine that Trump rambled his favorite word salad and McCartney used his judgment. Okay. That's you know what? That's a plausible explanation. But as I said, the timing is mad suspicious. The timing is mad suspicious because suddenly there's a source, and this information came out to Radio Canada, just as, and it's all lining up in a weird way. This source reveals certain information to Radio Canada, or Radio Canada comes upon this information somehow. It coincides with a period of time where McCartney seems to be struggling with momentum in the polls. And the topic of discourse happens to be something that favors McCartney. And then you then add the position of the CBC going and actually initiating that. So like there's a lot of things that line up there in a weird sort of way. In a weird sort of way, there's quite a few things that line up there. Now, is it quite possible that all of this was all random and McCartney is just living on the fly? Sure, but you know, it's one of those things that you see in Hollywood movies where a person dies and then the detective is basically like who has the most to benefit here. And if you look far enough, McCartney is the person with the most to benefit here. Now, obviously, there is a chance that this does go against him because now I'm sure there's some people asking the question, is he the guy that's capable of negotiating with Donald Trump as we thought he was? And that's where Isa comes in, actually. Isa says, McCartney is capable enough to manage the economy and negotiate. Now, I did a show earlier this week, talking about their platforms. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. In terms of the costed platform, between comparing Poilievre's platform and McCartney's platform, personally, as someone who wants to see long-term growth and a more future-oriented economy, I think McCartney had the better platform in that sense. So in that sense, you know, you can say he had the better platform. Now, obviously, not in the fiscal side of things, because Poilievre obviously had the less deficit in his platform, right? So depending on what side, whichever direction you want the country to go in terms of fiscal policy or what matters to you, you can pick and choose which one you vote for. I'm not going to go back over that. We talked about that earlier this week. Isa says, I'm just not confident with McCartney that McCartney is going to actually proceed to improve Canada. And that is the question, isn't it? That is the big question. Like, what? But I will counter with this, though. Well, where's the confidence that Poilievre will improve Canada either? Where's the confidence that his positions on things like he scrapped basically anything that comes to like the environment in his costed platform? There's a chance there that Poilievre would only divide us more than, and the way the laws work here, like, you need a consensus to get things done, right? And if Poilievre is not able to secure a consensus because his positions are so divisive, what then, right? Where's the progress then, right? Asante says, this is why the CBC should be defunded, because they are trying to create narratives that help Carney and manufacture consent from the public by acting as if the Liberals will win a landslide. So, you know, this was something I talked about a while ago, to be fair. The polls have actually not been very far away from what the end results of the election has been in the last 4 elections. So this idea that we all doubt what the polls say, the polls are showing you what I would say you should believe the polls for what they are right now. Now, is Pierre Poilievre catching up? Yes, he is. And that's good for me, because I predicted that McCartney, even if I think McCartney would win, but I predicted McCartney would only win a minority. So this is actually good for me if Pierre Poilievre catches him. Anyways, Asande says, I know many immigrants Nigerians and Asians and Indians who are voting conservative. Yes, because I think Polyev likes to say this a lot. He says that the promise of Canada has been broken. And that's the thing. I'm an immigrant myself, as you might have noticed. People always tell me how I don't have the quintessential Canadian accent, but, which is kind of weird because there's so many accents across Canada. But people always call me on my accent all the time. Anyways, but yeah, a lot of people do feel like the promise of Canada has been broken to people in the sense that people come to this country, hope, as Polyev likes to say, believing that if they work hard and do all the right things, that they can make a better life for themselves. And increasingly, that is not necessarily true. Like, some of us work and we sometimes and people sometimes find it difficult to actually, like, I mean, housing is a big thing, right? I live in Vancouver, where we have the most expensive real estate in the entire country, essentially, right? So there's that promise has been broken, and that makes people right now feel like that's why you see a lot of people, a lot of immigrants voting conservative in this election. Kevin Boyle says, when you look like at a homeless shelter and you look at all the tents, what is 90% of the race? So I'm guessing you're talking a bit about immigration again, and you're saying because okay, now I'm gonna attempt to interpret what you're saying here. Okay. You're saying most of the people in the homeless shelter, you're saying it's not people who have immigrated to Canada. So who are those people? I want you to. Okay, here's somebody who's defending this. Killer B47 says CBC based Trump, more like Trump admin unable to hold back 51st state rhetoric. LOL. Okay, I'm gonna call you on that. Well, if they're unable to hold back, they were holding back perfectly fine by themselves for the last 3 weeks. We did not hear anything about the 51st state from the point where the rate was dropped until this week, until last week when the CBC asked that question. So don't give me that about them not being able to hold back themselves. Now, Trump has been doing his thing. He has been putting tariffs. He has been, doing whatever craziness he likes to do. But he wasn't, I mean, even when he made this statement about Canada not being a viable state, he certainly didn't call Carney the governor of Canada. And he just spoke about it from the perspective of, they depend on us for everything, which is the unfortunate reality of where Canada is at the moment. We depend very highly on trade with the US. So technically, if you didn't ask him those questions, if you didn't ask him his opinion on stuff, that wouldn't have come up. So don't give me that about the CBC with that question. It was definitely a bait topic. Like, we didn't need. Tell me a single Canadian that needed to know the answer to that question. As a Canadian, tell me that you wanted to know the answer to that question in the lead up 4 days to our election. Did you really need to know the answer to that question? Braveheart says the CBC is no different from hot media. They are just a well-packaged mess and they cover their back well. Okay, you're addressing Carmen there. Killer B47 says, also, I don't believe your timeline is correct. Katie Johnson questioned the press secretary well before Radio Canada reported on Trump's phone call. Well, that's, I think, I don't know, maybe I've said that the opposite way, but I'm pretty sure I said a week ago, and her name is Katie Simpson, not Katie Johnson, as far as I remember. Pretty sure that the reporter there was Katie Simpson. And she asked the press secretary a week ago. And this whole thing about where Radio Canada reported the phone call happened this week, probably even yesterday, right? That's when that information surfaced. At least that's what the date on these videos are showing me here. So I'm not really sure what you're calling me on. Oh yeah, but Killer B ends up going on to say, but I understand your reasoning. It makes sense and definitely helps Carney. Well, it depends. But some people might actually, as I said, might start to look at that and go, well, he must not be that great of a negotiator if we're exactly where we were before, right? If the evidence now is surfacing that we're exactly where we were before Trump, because we were happy that, okay, we're no longer talking about the 51st state. We still have problems on the tariff side. We still have problems on the on that we need to address with Trump, but we're no longer on this issue of the 51st state. But now it turns out we didn't actually make any progress. Okay, so like you say it helps Carney, but there is a chance it does not, because Poilievre has been trying to reframe the narrative and say, well, it turns out nobody can actually do anything about Donald Trump. What we can do is fix our economy, fix our and fix our fix Canada as a whole, fix our interprovincial trade, and fix all of that, and try and diversify away from the U.S. But I will admit that Poilievre did not do a great job of. He did not put diversification, all that. It did not put any focus on that in his platform. His platform did not show that he understood the need for Canada to diversify. On the other hand, McCartney had that in his platform, clearly stated. In fact, he put the like most people think the reason why McCartney won't remove they assume the reason why McCartney won't remove the carbon tax on industries is just because of net zero. Well, if you know a little bit about trade with the EU, you'll know that Canada does need a price on carbon in order to trade with Europe. That's why you notice, if you read his McCartney's platform, that he's got the Canada border adjustment mechanism there. Sorry, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, not Canada. Okay. Laura Baker said, wish I could stay to watch, but I have to go to bed as I work in the morning. Great to have you, Laura. Thanks for joining tonight. And she says, Carney will definitely make it worse. Liberals are the party of division, not conservatives. I don't know about that. I think they both have their issues, I would say. But R says, McCartney denied the failures, claiming that they don't listen to him, but claimed 2008, I'm guessing you mean the financial crisis, as his success. Following his reasoning, it has nothing to do with him. Overall, he's not that capable. Okay, so this is this is kind of a. I feel like conservatives have been trying recently to discredit what McCartney stands for and his resume and all that. Now, you guys, how about this? Instead of me rambling my opinion at you, you guys tell me, what do you think of McCartney's resume? Do you see the advantage? Do you see the appeal of the resume? Let me know. I'm gonna let that one marinate and sit with you guys for a little bit. And R proceeds to say, I don't trust McCartney, and his old person's persona feels manufactured. He is definitely working an angle, and his angle is to sit in the. The Liberals have basically made this election about McCartney's resume, or the perception of his resume, and his personality, which is supposed to be. People have this assumption that McCartney is less spiky than Pierre Poilievre, but the truth is, if you listen to the way he responds to reporters, sometimes you realize he's a bit of a smiling assassin. A little bit, he's a bit of a smiling assassin. He's very, very easy to tick off. So I don't, but that's the perception, right? People are voting for the people who will vote McCartney will vote for him based on his resume and his personality, it seems. Kevin Boyle says, because Poilievre has lived here all his life and McCartney is just here to put his agenda in place. That's interesting argument. R says, Mr. Wolf, you said my mind. He is not that capable if we are still talking about it. Tariffs are not solved. 51st say not solved. This calls my Carney's capability into question. Well, before we run off down the line in that particular line of questioning, but here's the thing though. You could argue he's still in caretaker mode. He's not the universally acknowledged prime minister yet until the election is over. So you could argue he has not been empowered to handle the problem, right? But the fact is, we're right back where we started. We have tariffs on, and Trump is threatening to increase those tariffs on the auto manufacturing sector to even higher, and we still have the 51st state rhetoric. He has not knocked that shit off, right? So in that sense, you could argue we're right back where we started, but I'm going to temper that and tell you that, well, the fact is that he doesn't really have the mandate just yet. Kilebi says, my bad, I misheard then. Also, even if Katie Simpson did ask the question as bait, which I agree it was, it just proves that the Trump admin still maintains the same stances, but no longer. Okay, so okay. There's to bring okay. I'm trying to see if I get your point. I'm going to read your 3 comments here, Killer B. McCartney is a very standard neoliberal centrist. People are flocking towards the liberals because they are strategically voting against the conservatives. I don't think many of the left like McCartney. Yeah, no, you know what? That's fair. In fact, I was listening to a show on the CBC today, and it was a trans person or a member of the 2S LGBTQ community came on the show, and they were talking about how they were feeling a bit left out by McCartney because he wasn't talking a lot about his support or his acceptance of the 2S LGBTQ community. So obviously, if you go through McCartney's platform, it does have some line items where he does make some allocations towards promoting pride and the LGBTQ community. So it's interesting that you say like the left doesn't like him because he's, as you rightly said, he's not that all the way left in that way. He's very much a centrist. But is he the centrist that we need right now? I mean, you could argue that Pierre Poilievre, in his public-facing persona, is actually a centrist as well. Is more of a right of center, but you could argue that Poilievre, in his public-facing persona, I mean, before he started talking about bringing straws back, I guess. Before he started talking about bringing plastic straws back, you could argue Pierre Poilievre is actually like center, right of center, you know. But then he started talking about plastic straws, and I lost my shit. Like, dude, come on, man. Like, why did you have to do that? Kevin Boyle says, "How can liberals make the argument that Carney, who's better able to How can liberals argue that Carney is better able to handle Trump? When Trump dropped tariffs, he dropped tariffs on everyone except Canada and China. Well, to be fair, you got to include Mexico in that equation, and he didn't. And you got to. The other thing is the tariffs are kind of all over the shop. So he has tariffs on all imported cars, which is what Canada has right now. So I wouldn't say he dropped tariffs on everyone. He dropped reciprocal tariffs on everyone else, which Canada never had reciprocal tariffs at all. That's what he dropped. He dropped reciprocal tariffs, but he still maintains the tariffs on all foreign-made vehicles, all foreign-made cars. And he maintains that they don't want Canada's cars. They want to make the cars in Detroit, right? The other thing he still has tariffs on is on aluminum and steel, which affects Canada because we supply like 60% of what the US imports on aluminum and steel. Or that might be the aluminum number. I don't remember the specific numbers for both of them. So that acutely affects us because we have, obviously, as you might know, we have a very deeply integrated auto sector, and we supply them a lot of aluminum and steel, right? But I think it's inaccurate there to say that he dropped tariffs on everybody else but kept them on us. We still have tariffs, but it's not we're not special. Mexico has the same tariffs. Braveheart says, I argue caretaker, but he used this in his campaign that he has solved it and he's the man. Well, yes. Well, that's the sneaky thing he did, right? He conveniently omitted the fact that the President Trump had not changed anything. Well, that's not true. President Trump has yet to call McCartney Governor Carney. We haven't heard that yet. So that's a change in some regard. That's a softening. There's a softening of the tone there. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, actually. I think Trump is going to end up being probably the best thing to happen to Canada in the next 4 years. You know why? Recently, I'm sure if you've been paying attention to the news, you'll have seen that the Atlantic provinces, so Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, signed a free trade agreement of some sorts in some regard with Ontario. And today, Newfoundland announced a free trade agreement with, I think it might have been New Brunswick again. So little by little, McCartney promised that we would have free trade across Canada by Canada Day. Little by little, we're moving in that direction. And whether this matters, whether this is, whether I don't know if it matters whether McCartney is prime minister or not, or if Pierre Poilievre would get the same result, because it does seem like the premiers are the ones leading this charge. But it does seem that we're moving closer, which is kind of dumb to me when you see the interprovincial barriers we have in this country. It is so stupid. So because of Trump now, we're moving towards a position where we can, and I'll use McCartney's words here, we can give ourselves more than the US can take away from us. Okay, so that's one point. We need to diversify our trade. It is unhealthy how dependent we are on the US. And if you want to know the benefit of diversification, and this was a failure, I think, in Pierre Poilievre's platform, he did not emphasize diversification enough. He emphasized a little bit about domestic development, but there was not enough there. He was leaning, as I said, heavily on the private sector to do the development, which I don't think is the right approach. But there was also not enough emphasis on diversification, and that I think is a strength that McCartney had in his platform. What does Camargen says? Poilievre is full of hate, bro. Poilievre does cater to a certain, I wouldn't say he's full of hate, but he does cater to a certain portion of our society that is frustrated with where the country currently is. He caters to a certain base of people that are just, I don't know if angry is the word to use, but I'll use it anyways. But people that are angry with where the country is, that are angry with where their lives are, that are angry with where their finances are, that are angry with, just the general direction that this country is going. He is in many ways a reflection of people's frustration. He literally just fanned the flames. That's all he did, right? He gave people a target. And at some point that was Trudeau, which he did effectively. I'm sure he's kicking himself right now. Why did he do such a good job on Trudeau that Trudeau is not the one contesting against him right now? Because if this were Trudeau, this would be like signed, sealed, and delivered, all done. He wouldn't have to deal with the resume, whether you believe the McCartney's resume is all that or not. He wouldn't have to deal with the resume. But here we are, right? So I wouldn't say Poilievre himself is full of hate. In the few moments that I have seen him, just like outside the, like he is a lot more classy than I think people give him credit for. I think Poilievre is a lot more classy than people give him credit for. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. You guys have probably heard this example before. When Trudeau resigned and McCartney took over, he actually took his time to wish Trudeau well in his retirement. Now, he could have kicked him on his way out the door. He did not. He chose to actually like take a minute in his speech that day and actually, said thank you for your service without saying thank you for your service, but said something nice, right? So I think there's a little bit of class to the man that most people don't recognize. Killer B says Poilievre may be center right, but is firmly deep in the conservative side of culture war nonsense, like blaming everything on woke, which is why of the two options, Carney is more centrist. Yeah, no, for sure, I can agree with that. Carney is definitely more of a centrist than Poilievre. Poilievre leans into and maybe that's because of where his base is. Now, a lot of the base that he's looking to draw on is, unfortunately for him, because I don't think Poilievre does not believe in climate change. But a lot of the base that he will seek to draw on are people that perhaps don't believe in climate change. A lot of the base that he would seek to draw on now, I don't know how he feels about vaccines and I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to say this part because I don't want the show to get canceled. But a lot of the base that he'll seek to draw on might be anti-vax because of COVID and stuff like that, and an anti-mandate and all of that stuff, right? So unfortunately for him, but that's where the people are available in terms of like just sheer numbers. So he hasn't leaned into that as deeply as maybe Trump would, and maybe that's what there was a while ago. Trump was saying something about Poilievre. Trump was saying something like he's not a MAGA guy, and it occurred to me that, well, when you think about it, Poilievre doesn't really lean into the really far, when they think about far out there ideas. You never, as far as I know, I've never heard Poilievre say one single conspiracy theory. You know how good that would be in terms of galvanizing like certain parts of the base that are potentially conservative right now, dude. so you could argue that Poilievre is not as far right as a lot of people think he is in my opinion. R says bringing plastic straws is not bad if they make it colorless and make recycling priority. Paper straws are more poisonous because of the chemicals. Pierre isn't wrong. And that's something I was talking to a scientist friend of mine. Some of you who are watching right now might know I'm a scientist myself, but I was talking to a scientist friend of mine because I was like, okay, this doesn't. Why is Pierre Poilievre talking about plastic straws? Like, we don't have an effective system to that recycles that stuff, and those things end up in landfills. They end up in oceans. They contribute to microplastics and all of that stuff. And what they explained to me was that, well, paper straws you might think are so much better, but it turns out that they put all these chemicals into the paper sometimes, beyond the fact that they soak up your milkshake and get soft in like 5 seconds. But also, like, some of the chemicals that go into those like plastic straws are actually not good for you. So essentially, this scientist friend of mine was telling me that, well, if with plastic straws, if you make the plastic straws just exactly as I just said, if you make the plastic straws colorless and you improve your recycling protocol, then you can actually make plastic straws a little bit more environmentally friendly than paper straws. Now that was very interesting to me. It's pretty interesting because right away I was like, "Oh, plastic! Get rid of all the plastic! Paper." But then, that's an interesting argument that you could make, right? That's an interesting argument. Iser says lots of people probably don't know this, but Melissa Landsman is conservative MP and part of the LGBTQ community. You're right. That is a big nugget there. Nobody knows that. I don't know who that is. Who is which constituency? If you could tell me what constituency Melissa Landsman is, that is interesting. I did not know that. But I mean, to be fair, there are I mean, we live in a very diverse society here. I'm sure there are members of the LGBTQ community who are conservative of mindset right now, because there are people that feel, even within the LGBTQ community, that feel like we've gone way too far in our promotion of certain things, and a lot of what the conservatives will look to have used effectively a little bit in trying to scare people is basically by saying, the liberals want to turn your kids, trans and all of that stuff. That's obviously the scare tactic that the conservatives have used a lot. But I will argue with you, Isar. I'll say this: we would know more about the conservative MPs if Pierre Poilievre would let them friggin' talk to the press. Apart from the fact that Pierre Poilievre himself is only answering like 4 questions every press conference, and the CBC has covered this actually. They did there was a cute chat that they did where they were like, oh, Pierre Poilievre only answers 4 questions every press conference, no follow-up. There was actually a video that surfaced today that shows them actually manhandling, of physically handling a member of the press. This wasn't even a CBC reporter now. This was a CTV reporter, I want to say. Because this person was trying to ask one of the MPs, one of Pierre Poilievre's MPs, a question. Right? And this is the common theme. Pierre Poilievre is not letting his MPs show anywhere or answer any questions. And that has been a big criticism of his leadership in this particular run. Now, I can guess why he's keeping them away from the media, because I mean, we had this in British Columbia here, where I live, where John Rostad was the leader of the Conservative Party, yeah, and some of his MPs would come up with things like, we've already seen one of the MPs in Pierre Poilievre's team here, Aaron Gunn, who is actually coincidentally one of the people aspiring somewhere in BC here. He's aspiring to become an MP somewhere in BC. And his thing was, he denied that residential schools and the events that took place in residential schools was actually a genocide. Or he also, I think, I don't remember the exact premise, so I don't want to butcher that, but he said that residential schools were not. It basically implied residential schools was not as serious as people say it is. Now, that is a controversial statement to make. It is a controversial statement to make today, right? So those are the kinds of opinions that Pierre Poilievre is probably trying to shield, because I'm sure there are MPs that are contesting under the conservative banner. If I know anything about conservatives, there are MPs that are contesting under the conservative banners that will hold certain opinions that you would consider very unpopular today. Not because I mean, some people might agree with what they say, but they're very unpopular opinions that can possibly lose Pierre Poilievre an election. So that's possibly the reason why he keeps a tight rein on them. But I want you to tell me about this Melissa Landsman, because I want to know, do they hide her in a dark room where nobody's able to see her? Because it's interesting that you have an LGBTQ person, because I don't know exactly. Anyways, I don't want to make assumptions about who she is. But it's interesting that they have a person that's a member of this community in the Conservative Party, still running nonetheless. Braveheart says, I need to catch up on the comments, actually. I've been slow tonight. Trump says, Braveheart says, Trump is a wake-up call to everyone. I agree, Trump is a good thing. He is a game changer. Isa says, though sadly, she doesn't have much good experience about it, since they can't think of gay being conservative and lean to right-wing. Oh, yeah. It is hard to see a gay person being conservative sometimes, but the truth is, and I'll say this as someone who's been observing the trends, more and more people that are members of the LGBTQ community do feel like we've gone a little bit too far to the left. There are, you'll be surprised by how many people that are within that community that are leaning very right now. You'll be surprised. especially because the big topic of the day right now is the economy, right? And the economy affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you're gay or you're straight, right? So a lot of people probably agree that the economy hasn't been too hot under the liberals. Killer B says hard for the LGBTQ community to lean conservative when it is antithetical to their existence. And that is true. That is true. And that's probably what holds back a lot of members of that community from being conservative. That's fair. As I said, I think Polyev mentioned in his other video how he doesn't really believe in left or yes, he did. I remember that video. That was the one where he was biting into the apple and then ruining that journalist at the time. I remember that video because I think the journalist was like, "Oh, people say you're far right and all of that." He was like, "No, which people?" And he was biting into this apple and going, "Oh, which people? Oh, I don't believe in left, right, or I was like, yo, that was so bad." Isa says, I think Pierre Polyev mentioned how he doesn't. Okay, that's the same thing. Braveheart says, PP is right, not allowing them. They are biased. They'll just ask him questions about not contesting again or any other dumb question. Well, that I mean, with this track record of trying to bait, obviously the CBC trying to bait the Trump administration into coming back with the 51st state rhetoric, and now obviously we know in the past that the CBC has asked Pierre Polyev if he would resign, if he would step aside, I think was the word, to let us get through an election, to let us get through the tariff threats. And I remember thinking at the time that was a stupid ass question. like why would you even ask that question? But the other side of it, and you can point this out as well, is the progressives, so the NDP and the liberals, have not been open to answering questions from the alt media as well. Like there's this organization, you might have heard about them, the Rebel News, who they tried to ask Jagmeet Singh a question. It might have been last week or maybe earlier this week. And they try to also participate in the post-debate scrums. And instead of taking the time to answer their questions, they just canceled the entire scrum because I guess they couldn't exclude Rebel News, or I don't know whether it's just a bunch of circumstances that lined up together or whatever, but they did refuse to answer, and Jagmeet Singh often would refuse to answer questions from Rebel News. Now, in my opinion, I think there should be a difference, in my opinion, and this is something that unfortunately Trump has blurred those lines between the mainstream news and alt media. I do not think that alt media should get the same access as the mainstream media. Because, as I said earlier, and if you were listening at that time, the mainstream media has certain standards that they can get held to. Right? If they are found to be going against certain standards, you can call them on it. With the alt media, there's a bit more of an emphasis on the dramatic, on making things more theatrical and all of that, and they have less of a standard, less of a burden of truth on them. So I don't think that the mainstream media should have the same access as alt media. Right? That's just my opinion there. Killer B says, "Oh, you're a Vancouverian." Nice. You too. Oh wow. All right, fellow Vancouverian in the chat over there. Very good. Kevin Boyle says, "Gunn is a respected investigative reporter." Okay, so one of the controversies about the residential school thing came from so you guys might remember they said they found some potential sites of mass graves in Kamloops, which is also in BC. If you're in British Columbia, you might know where Kamloops is. And obviously, I think the big difference is just the fact that it hasn't been it's still a potential site, right? I don't know that any excavation or anything has revealed bodies just yet. They just say it's a potential site. But also, he, he's taken essentially reports from people who residential school survivors with a grain of salt and not believing them, or feeling like, you know, I was reading a report the other day from these people that these people that don't that these I don't want to use this word. They call them residential school denialists. So I'll just give you that word to be, if that makes it easier for you to understand what I'm saying. But I was reading one of their reports, and they said, well, apart from the fact that, you know, there's no excavation has revealed an actual mass site of a mass grave in Kamloops. It's just a potential site. That the number of deaths, and I'm just reporting to you, I'm not telling you what to believe, I'm not telling you what I believe, because I don't want this to be a controversial thing that we get into. They say a report in this particular report that that the number of deaths that we believe to have taken place in residential schools, where people talk about thousands, is actually closer to, in terms of verified records, is closer to hundreds. And they say that some of those hundreds actually happen to be children who died of tuberculosis, and that a lot of those tuberculosis cases came from reserves before they were enrolled in residential schools. So that's a lot of where this conspiracy theory comes in. Now, I will say this, and this is where I'm gonna push back a little bit. I think it is extremely whether this turns out to be founded or not, there are real people that are facing real consequences in their current lives because of the effects of residential schools. So I think it is, at the very least, it is politically destructive for a potential candidate that wants to lead people of diverse origins to be saying this in public, right? And I don't want to go into that, but at the very least, it is destructive to the cause for Aaron Gunn to be saying that. Okay, and you can also talk about the fact that it lacks empathy for him to be saying that as well, to kind of be trying to discount the emotions of these people who, as I say, are facing real consequences in their lives at the moment. Okay, so Good Flop 2 says liberals will do anything to raise fear when they are far more dangerous for Canada than Trump. You know, actually, you guys tell me, and this is a question I want to ask for you guys. I want to ask of you guys. Do you think, and maybe one, I don't know if any of you works in any of the industries that is impacted by Trump's tariffs. If you do, just indicate in the chat. It would be nice to get your opinion on this. But I don't think we can underestimate the effects of Trump on Canada. We can't underestimate the effect of Trump on Canada, because, like, apart from the fact that our trade, we trade close to at least above 60%, 70% of our trade as a country is, or you know what, I don't want to make up a number, but there's a very good percentage of our trade as a country that is with the US. Now, if the US is closing its borders, well, suddenly we are losing the auto sector. Probably we're losing a lot of the auto sector, and we've already seen layoffs in Ontario. We're losing the aluminum and steel, and that's a big part of Quebec. You know, sure, we can still sell them oil from Alberta, but you can also see that we're not the ones making the money on oil, because the US will import our crude oil and refine that and make 3 times the profit on that. So we're not the ones making the money on that. Plus, we're selling to the US at a discount. Plus, the price of oil is actually going down right now. So you got to realize that like Trump is a real threat, right? Are the liberals the bigger threat though than Donald Trump? That's a good question to ask, right? If you consider the damage that, and they have done some, or under Trudeau they have done some damage. Let me give Carney the benefit of the doubt that he's only been here for 1 month, as he likes to say, right? But under Justin Trudeau, we essentially progressively over 9 years put ourselves in this situation. Okay, Kevin Boyle says Poilievre's deputy leader is a woman and LGBTQ. I did not know that. Again, he does not let any of them talk to the media, so I have never heard this woman talk. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna be honest with you. I have never heard her talk. I don't even know if I've ever seen her before. I don't know who that is. so I don't know. Maybe I'll go look if you want to put her name. Oh, Poilievre's deputy leader is Melissa Landsman. Oh, interesting. Okay, so I'll go look her up because I have never heard the name until you said it just now. R says gay or straight. Who you sleep with, hello, come on now. Who you sleep with should not be a political thing. Everybody is welcomed. We are all people. Oh, I love that kumbaya message there. I love it. I wish we would embrace that in our society. That's interesting. I did not know Melissa Landsman is actually the deputy leader of the Conservative Party. I never heard her name. Braveheart says this is the second time the CBC has been involved in election tampering. I can bet they are being instigated by the liberals. Oh, scandalous. Killerby says alt media does not necessarily have to be right-wing. However, they should still adhere to journalistic standards, but often they're just there to farm TikTok clips. And that's exactly right. Like, I don't want to shit on Rebel News, but sometimes it comes off to me like, instead of like, their version of pursuing truth is in some regards embracing conspiracy theories sometimes, and sometimes it's all about just like, a lot of times it's very self-effacing. It's very, they're so attention seeking, as you say, like farming TikTok clips. It's a problem. And sometimes you get some of these, and I know why they do it. Some you get some of these. The reason why I gave the example, I know alt media does not necessarily have to be right wing, but if you look online right now, you notice that most of the alt media channels, like probably 7 in 10 of the popular alt media channels on YouTube right now, are probably right wing. It feels to me sometimes like everybody's right wing right now. I'm probably the only centrist, and by centrist I mean someone with, as I always say, I have some opinions you might consider conservative and some you might consider liberal. But I am probably the only centrist channel that exists in Canada right now. I don't think anybody covers the news with the same kind of fairness that I do. If you know one, I'll be happy to meet such a person. But there's people on the left, like who's on the left? There's this guy. I'm not going to remember the name right now. It's fine. But there is quite a bit of right wing alt media in Canada for sure. Good Flop is actually calling me out. Good Flop is saying, "Are you kidding? The CBC is held to what standard?" Well, here's the standard the CBC gets held to. Now, if you write into so something happened, and I'll tell you this: Rebel News, called. They actually called the CBC on something. They said when the CBC was talking, someone at the CBC was talking. They said the mass graves at Kamloops that I said, the suspected mass graves at Kamloops, they didn't indicate that those mass graves were potential mass graves, right? And that became a thing where Rebel News called them on it, and they did publish a correction to that particular, and that is what you can do in terms of calling the CBC out. Now, a lot of people have then and I've done this before. There was a particular piece of news they covered. I don't remember exactly what it was a while ago. And I said, well, the CBC did not cover this news from a balanced perspective. And I made a video lambasting them about this. And the very next day, there was a video with a more balanced, there was a segment on power and politics with a more balanced approach. Now, I'm not saying they listen to me, but maybe they do, right? Anyways, so there are, but here's what I'll tell you, right? Can you compare the standard that you hold the CBC to compared to? Now, I don't want to shit on the right wing channel. I don't want to call out somebody and they'll get mad at me because they do a good job in their own lane. But so I'm not going to tell you guys the name because I don't want to shit on anybody. But like, if you watch enough of some of these alt media, they literally just like, a lot of them never, like, sometimes you'll see with me that I do this thing where like I'll cover things from both perspectives as best as I can. Like, I try not to tell you guys what to think. These channels, a lot of them they don't even bother with like hiding where they stand on issues. And it's easier that way because you get more subscribers that way. You get more people to follow your channel that way. But there's no fairness to the way they cover the news. There's no truth. It's just whatever truth they want their particular echo chamber to see, right? It's easier. Actually, I tried this one time. It is surprisingly easy to gain subscribers on YouTube and gain followers online if you just stick to one side and just court that side throughout. I'm talking too much. Anyways, where's the... Okay, so... Good Flop says Melissa Lampman has been on CTV several times and she has done many podcasts. Genuinely, I've never seen her, bro. I don't know why, but for some reason, it's almost like I grew a Melissa Lampman filter, and I just never heard of such a person. But that, I mean, to be fair, I don't know who Carney's deputy is either. So that's just the way it is. I'm pretty much very focused on the leaders. Killer B says, but doesn't it feel like the entire news reporting landscape has changed? I mean, just look at how influential Twitter was in spiraling MAGA out of control. That is true. The media landscape has changed. But I guess my fear with the changing media landscape is this, right? There has to be an expectation of truth. Right? If we allow the media ecosystem to be ruled by opinions, because here's what I did today. I gave you guys a bit of a conspiracy theory feel. Right? My conspiracy was that the CBC was in some way trying to help Carney by baiting the Trump administration into returning to the 51st state rhetoric. That's a conspiracy theory, but it is my opinion. Right? Now, the problem with that becoming standard of news is that at that point, there's no truth anymore, right? There's no truth. Like, what is the truth at that point? If everything is just someone's opinion and everybody and people can pick and choose what they choose to believe. And the other thing that you'll realize is that it's very easy for you to farm up like an echo chamber. Trust me. In doing YouTube as long as I've done YouTube now a little bit over a year, and you will not believe some of the things that people believe online, right? And if you don't get to consume news from different angles and different perspectives, it's easy for you to carry on life believing the dumbest shit. Like, you just sit there and you believe things that make zero sense, but because that is literally all your exposure is, you never actually you never experience the other side. You never get someone to actually like call your bullshit a little bit and like, okay, why do you believe that? Actually ask you a question that makes you think, oh, that makes no sense, right? Okay. Yeah, exactly. And Killer B does say leftist alt media in Canada is very weak. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's a good shot, actually. Steve Boots is a leftist alt media. Yeah, and there's not many of those. But even with Steve Boots, right? He does his thing. But even with Steve Boots, you notice that you hardly ever hear Steve Boots talk about anything good about Polyev. Like, trust me, I've watched enough of his stuff to see that he would never, like, maybe once in a while he would throw in something like, "Oh, McCartney did this," but he would probably never. I haven't. Maybe he makes like 20 videos. Maybe one of them is one that's not complimentary of McCartney, or maybe one of them is not criticizing Pierre Polyev, and that I don't think that's the right way. But that is what sells here in Canada. That's what sells. Like, centrist media, as Isa says, is very rare in this country. Anyways, we're coming to the end here. I'm just going to run through some of the comments that seem a bit different so that we don't just stay here all night. I don't want to keep you guys. Killer B says, I disagree. Being transparent with your beliefs is actually good media reporting and good academic integrity. I don't believe that objectivity or remaining unbiased is a thing that can truly exist. Yes, that is true. Objectivity, I think, can exist. I think I try and do this, stay as objective as possible, where if I see a certain, obviously, you guys know I'm going to vote in this election. I'm going to vote in this election, and I'm going to vote one of the candidates at some point, right? On election day, not at some point. But the objective eye in me, I'm able to see, okay, we did a review of both platforms this week, and I showed you guys, okay, these are the good sides of Pierre Poilievre's platform. This is the downside of the platform. I brought up McCartney's platform, and I told you, okay, these are the good sides of McCartney's platform in terms of, the foreign trade and diversification and all of that, and the investment catalyzed by the government, that kind of thing. On Pierre Poilievre's side, it's just the fiscal responsibility, right? And I was able to present you those 2 points of views and go, okay, well, what is important to you when you're voting in this election? Is it fiscal responsibility, or is it the potential for growth, which may not materialize? You then get to pick which of these points of views you most align with, right? So that's objectivity. That's what I think objectivity should be. My goal on this channel is never to think for you or to make your decision for you. You'll notice that's not my bag. That's not my bag. It would be the easier thing to do. I could just sit there and just shit on McCartney all day long. Because trust me, there's stuff to shit on. Or I could sit there and shit on Pierre Poilievre because, also that's also an easy thing to do as well. But I don't do that. Anyways, Goldie Flop says the CBC is the mouthpiece for the Liberal Party. It's seeming like that these days. They don't report anything negative about the Liberals. I don't think that is true. And I'm actually gonna call you on that one. I know I've done a lot of shitting on the CBC and the Liberals. But I'll tell you this. Think about every single time that you've seen McCartney shake about something. Including today when I showed you that someone like Radio Canada was the one that revealed the fact that Trump did mention the 51st state in that phone call with McCartney, even if McCartney did not let that information come out. Now, whether the Carney team actually leaked that information to them or not, we'll never know. That's one. The assets, who do you think was the person that asked the question about McCartney's blind trust and his assets and the potential conflicts of interest? Was their CBC reporter, right? I think there's this illusion that the CBC has been nice to McCartney in this election. His very first public appearance on Canadian TV was on a show with Rosemary Barton, where and she asked him a few questions about I think it was about his assets still, actually. And that was the first point that we saw McCartney shake in his response to that question. So there's this illusion that the CBC has been nice to McCartney in this election. I don't think it's true. If you watch them enough, you'll find that they've actually been a little bit more fair than people realize in this election, if you listen to them long enough. And I listen to them a lot. But I mean, you're right that there have been times in historically where they've been the mouthpiece of the Liberal Party. Killer B says good journalism equals remaining unbiased. In my opinion, it means having good sourcing, fact checking, and reasonable interpretation. Yes, it does. Unfortunately, fact checking is increasingly. I mean, you guys might have seen this news. The CTV actually hired a certain leftist reporter. I don't remember her name now, but she's a leftist alt media girl, woman, but she was hired initially, or she was about to be hired by CTV to host the fact-checking show. Now she does. Oh, okay, yeah, I remember her name now. Her name was Rachel Gilmore. Now Rachel Gilmore was about to be hired by the CBC to do a fact-checking, the CTV, sorry, to do a fact-checking show on their station every Friday or something. And they got pressure from certain sources, and they dropped that show because they felt like it was gonna be too controversial, right? So that's unfortunately that's the kind of fact checking is dying a very slow and painful death in our journalism these days, and a lot of it is just trash. Without fact checking, without truth, the media is trash. The media is trash, right? Anyways, Good Flop 2 says CBC gets over $1 billion per year from the Liberals. They can't be unbiased. And yet, as I said, I think, yes, it's hard to stay unbiased, and they do get money from the CBC, from the Liberals. But I think they do their best. They do their best. And you're right. It's hard to break that. Like, you get money from, if you get money from an organization, you can't really separate that. I feel like we've run away from. I feel like we've run away from the actual topic today, and I want to get back to that as we round up today. I want to get back to that. Who do you think? Do you guys think the Carney team leaked this information to the CBC? Do you guys think the Carney team see that? Do you guys think the Carney team sees that they're losing ground in the election? Because as I showed you, I can show you what the polls are. Some of the polls are sitting right now, actually, if you want. Some of the polls they're showing this tightening that is not very favorable to the Liberals. And you can see here that even like a lot of conservatives hate Nanos, but now even Nanos is showing a tightening in the polls. You see, even a few days ago, Nanos was showing on April 20th here, you see Nanos was showing that the Liberals were up 6 points on the Conservatives. You see here that now they say it's 4 points. And it has slowly been going down that way. And overall, you see that the Liberals are only up 4 points now. You got to consider that you think about it, they were up like what? There was a point where they were up to 44% in the popular vote, and the Conservatives were down at 37%, right? That was how far the gap was once upon a time, and now it's getting closer. So do you guys think the Liberals have spotted this particular weakness in their numbers, and could they, is it plausible that they could have leaked this information about this whole Trump still wanting Canada to be the 51st state to the CBC? And has any of you as yet come up with an alternative explanation for why the friggin' CBC would decide it was a good idea to go remind the White House in case they forgot about calling Canada the 51st state? Somebody give me an explanation to that, right? Give me an explanation to that. Anyways. Killer B says, I have no evidence that they did it. Thus, I won't make any judgments. It doesn't matter to me. I've already made up my mind and voted. Oh, how many of you? Actually, I'm curious about that. Josh White says they're drumming up headlines. And they sure drummed up headlines, because I was like, why? Is it really what? You can't be that stupid. Like, why would you go and ask that question, you know? Like, and not you, Josh. I'm talking about the CBC reporter. Good Flop 2 says, yes, they wanted the 51st state back in the news to stir up the fear and take the focus off their record of the past 10 years. Next, they will bring up abortion. It's getting late in the game to bring up abortion now, mate. Josh White says CBC gets more clicks and views when Trump is in the headlines. I think everybody gets more clicks and views when Trump is in the headlines. Even I get more clicks and views when Trump is in the headlines. What do you mean? like if I've got to say though, I've said this several times. If Trump wins this election, the liberals have got to build. They've got to build him a statue, preferably one like they got to paint it orange as well, and just like, you know, they've got to build Donnie a statue. I don't know, but no, I mean even I as a person that's just as a YouTuber, I get more clicks if I make news about Trump, and it's very tempting because he's just always rolling out something. He's always doing something, right? It's hard not to just want to cover him all the time. Anyways, well, it looks like that. How about we hang it up there tonight? I kept you guys away from all the good stuff that you probably should be doing tonight. You guys have been awesome tonight. I love the engagement. I love how you guys just get in the chat and let me know your mind. Actually, I'm really enjoying these live shows. You know, I love that you guys really like care about this election, and you share your points of views as well. Some of you who might be new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe before you run off. That way you don't miss any of the live shows. You know what I'm gonna do actually on Monday? I'm gonna do a mega show for you guys for the election when I get back from my actual job. This is something I do for fun, by the way. When I get back from my actual job, what I'm going to do is we're going to have an election day mega stream, and it will be sometime around 7:30 on Monday. And we're gonna bring in we're gonna talk about how the election day went and what you guys expect the results to be. You guys might remember I predicted the Liberals will win a minority. Now, obviously, I'm not right as the polls show it now. It shows the Liberal majority, but let's see if I end up getting it correct. You guys can drop your prediction. Okay, you guys can drop your prediction in the chat. Who do you think wins the election, and what kind of government do you think we have? Do you think we get a majority, or do you think we might get a minority? BB's making a late surge here. BB was the first comment in the chat, and now he's just making a late surge here. BB says, "Good Flop 2, you're showing your Justin Trudeau derangement syndrome." Whoa, hello, come on. Why you gotta start a fight when I'm about to leave, bro? You know that's the interesting. That's what makes the show interesting. Anyways, BB says Liberals will win a majority. BB says again, Maple MAGA will claim the election was rigged. I hope that doesn't happen. You know, I don't want to hear anybody crying about elections being rigged after the elections is done. Elections are done. It really undermines our democracy, in my opinion. I don't want to hear anybody talking about a rigged election. Good Flop 2 says, no, my desire to stop obstruction of stop the destruction of Canada is showing. Oh my god. Yeah, Killer B is laughing like I am. Justin Trudeau derangement syndrome is crazy. It is crazy. Answer says Canada first, and BB says, sorry I couldn't join the chat earlier, but thanks for the good show. Yo, you're always appreciated on the show. Thank you for joining anytime. Just join us anytime. As I was saying though, yeah, exactly. John Rostad was crying about election being rigged. To be fair, it wasn't really John Rostad though. It was the other members of his team. But as I round up tonight, as I said, I will have an election night kind of show for you guys. I don't know how long we'll go, but we'll have a live chat as usual. I want you guys to come in to the chat with your stories. Jeez, you guys with your chats, man. You guys are so funny. Thanks, Hila B, for the sub. I really appreciate the sub. Those of you that are in the chat right now, if you haven't subscribed, Do me a solid. Help a small channel. As I said, I'm holding this down for the center. There are no center podcast in Canada, you know. So I'm holding it down for the center. So you guys subscribe. Oh yeah, BB. I've told her this several times. Her name is too long. Is too long. I can't even read it. I just say Yeah, BB, thanks for the sub as well. Thanks for the sub. I really appreciate you. Oh, so Killer B wants to know, where did I immigrate from? A long time ago now, in a land far, far away, I immigrated from a country called Nigeria. That's where I was born. That's where I grew up. A lot of my life was in Nigeria. Okay, there's no more questions. Yeah, I'd love for you guys to join me on Monday. BB says I say you came from Sweden. I do not have a Swedish accent, my guy. I get British very often. But not Swedish. Swedish is pretty new. Anyways. Oh yeah. Anyways. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. Join me on Monday. I think that's when I'll make the next live show, and it will be all about elections that day. But you guys have a good night. Have yourselves a good night. I'll see you next time. Take care, guys. Bye.